Great. Good afternoon. My name is Sally Talberg, Chairman of the Michigan Public Service Commission. I call this meeting of the Commission to order on June 10th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Chairman Talberg.
Present.
Commissioner Scripps.
Present.
Commissioner Phillips.
Present.
Madam Chairman, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you. We are holding this meeting using Microsoft Live event. This is what we've been using for the last couple of months as we do remote meetings. It's compatible with all browsers except for Safari. Telephone relay service is also available through the phone option. And we will be calling out participant names before speaking to support those listening only by phone and using the relay service. As indicated in the notice for today's meeting, if we lose a connection, the Commission will be in recess and we'll attempt to reestablish a connection, but if we're unable to do so within 30 minutes, we'll adjourn the meeting. Decisions made prior to the disconnection will be binding and other business will be handled at a future meeting. We will not recess or adjourn due to technical issues experienced by individual members of the public. The meeting will be recorded and available for future reference on the Commission's website. However, in addition, the Commissioners can receive comment directly via the email mpsc_commissioners@michigan.gov, and that's also included in the meeting notice for today. And for reference, it's also on the meeting notice. If you have intermittent internet service, you should consider listening to the meeting via telephone, not the computer. So if there's an interruption, you can avoid missing part of the meeting. Another option is to watch with, the meeting through your internet service with the sound muted and then listen to the audio from your phone. And just please keep in mind that the video feed does have a slight delay while the telephone line is in real time. And we will have an opportunity for the public to make comment as provided in the agenda. And just a couple notes on that. Comments should be limited to one comment per person and can be made verbally by calling in, or you can write your comments via the live stream Q&A feature. And I'll go through more of the mechanics of that, but if you're participating using the Teams application, you can use the Q&A feature at any time, type in your comments in the box, and we'll have those queued up to read. And the Q&A function can also be used to request technical assistance or to submit comments, public comments directly to the Commission. If you plan to make verbal comments, you must call into the meeting by phone, and we have muted all attendees to minimize disruptions until we reach the time for public comment. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda for today's meeting. I'll recognize Commissioner Scripps for a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the approval of today's Commission meeting agenda.
And Commissioner Phillips?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, we'll have a vote on the motion. Commissioner Scripps?
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips?
Aye.
And I also vote in favor of the motion. The motion carries by unanimous vote and the agenda is approved. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the May 19th, 2020 regular Commission meeting. I'll recognize Commissioner Scripps.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the approval of the meeting minutes from the May 19th, 2020 regular Commission meeting.
Commissioner Phillips?
I second.
All right, any discussion? All right, we'll have a roll call vote. Commissioner Scripps?
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips?
Aye.
I also vote in favor of the motion. The motion carries by unanimous vote and the Commission meeting minutes of May 19, 2020 are approved. Next up, we have approval of orders on the consent agenda. Today, the Commission is assisted by Staff Attorney Lisa Gold. I'll recognize Ms. Gold at this time.
Good afternoon. Today's consent agenda consists of 2 communications matters and 3 gas matters. The proposed orders and minute actions for each of these matters have been thoroughly vetted by the Commission's technical and legal staff and are ready for your approval.
Commissioner Scripps for a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the approval of the orders and minute actions on today's consent agenda.
Commissioner Phillips?
I second the motion.
Any discussion? All right, we'll have a roll call vote. Commissioner Scripps?
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips?
Aye.
I also vote in favor of the motion. The motion carries by unanimous vote and the orders on the consent agenda are approved. We'll go back to recognize Ms. Gold.
Item 4A1 is case number U20623, which involves a notice filed by Talk America Services LLC of discontinuance of basic local exchange service and toll service. Staff member Shatina Jones is here to describe this order.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Shatina Jones, and I work in the Competitive Issues and Licensing section of the Telecommunications Division. On August 19, 2019, Talk America Services filed a notice with the Commission pursuant to Section 313 of the Michigan Telecommunications Act to discontinue providing basic local exchange and toll service to its Michigan customer base. At the time, about 4,600 customers. On January 6, 2020, Talk America Services notice of discontinuance of service was the first to happen under the amendments to Section 313 of the MTA through Public Act 52 of 2014. Talk America Services followed the notice requirements as outlined in Section 313, including providing notices to its customers and issuing a newspaper publications. As a result of the notices to customers, the Commission received comments or informal complaints from a dozen Talk America Services customers that were having difficulty obtaining an alternative provider of landline service. The Commission took action and commenced an investigation into the availability of comparable voice service, directing all incumbent local exchange carriers and competitive local exchange carriers operating in Talk America Services service area to file statements listing all the specific types of comparable voice service with reliable access to 911 and emergency services that they provide in that service area. More than 80 providers filed statements in the case. From the filed statements, the Commission compiled the list of alternative providers with available comparable residential voice service and posted it to its website on January 23, 2020, and also issued a press release, a consumer alert, and social media announcements to inform Talk America Service customers of the available comparable service options. Talk America Services delayed the discontinuance until February 3, 2020. On April 27, 2020, Talk America Services filed its notice in the docket that the company's process of discontinuance was complete and that the company no longer had any active customers in the state. In the order before you, the Commission agrees with the staff's determination that TAS has provided evidence that all of the requirements have been met, all customers have been transitioned to other service providers, and all complaints have been resolved. This concludes the Commission's investigation and closes the docket. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, and thanks for your excellent work on this case. I know it's been nice to see it come to resolution and just all the proactive work staff did to have an orderly process to review this and communicate with customers. Is there a motion from Commissioner Scripps?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I move for the approval of the order in case number U-20623.
And I'll recognize Commissioner Phillips.
I second.
And I think Commissioner Phillips wanted to make comment on this order. Is that correct?
I do, just briefly, and thank you, Shatina, again for the presentation. As you noted in your comments before the Commission, this was the first time that our staff had to operationalize the notice of discontinuance of service and subsequent customer complaint initiated investigation under the 2014 amendments to Section 313 of the Michigan Telecommunications Act. The Commission would like to thank our Telecommunications Division for their work in addressing customer complaints and conducting an investigation into the availability of comparable voice service with reliable access to 911 and emergency services in Talk America's service territory. As a result of the judicious and collective efforts of that team, and despite the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, all customer-related complaints were resolved as customers were transitioned to comparable ILEC, CLEC, and other provider services. As I stated in the December 19th Commission meeting last year, the Commission will continue to explore how the rapid business model and technological developments in the telecommunications industry may impact customers in Michigan, and to the best of our ability, ensure that those customers and communities are not left behind during this rapid transition. Thank you.
All right, we'll move to a roll call vote. Thank you for those comments. Commissioner Scripps.
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips.
Aye.
I also vote in favor of the motion. The motion carries by unanimous vote. The order in case number U-20623 is approved. Thanks again, Ms. Jones, and appreciate your comments, Commissioner Phillips. All right, we'll recognize Ms. Gold again.
Item 4A2 is case number U-20743, which involves an action on the Commission's own motion ordering Anthony Martell, doing business as Martell Cable Service, to show cause why it has not complied with the requirements of Public Act 480 of 2006. The order before you directs Anthony Martell, doing business as Martell Cable Service, to appear at a pre-hearing conference before an administrative law judge and to pre-file testimony and evidence.
I recognize Commissioner Scripps.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the approval of the order in case number U-20743.
Commissioner Phillips.
I second the motion.
Any discussion? All right, we'll have a roll call vote on the motion to approve the order. Commissioner Scripps.
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips.
Aye.
I also vote in favor of the motion. The motion carries by unanimous vote, and the order in case number U-20743 is approved. Ms. Gold for item 4A3.
Item 4A3 is case number U-20744, which involves an action on the Commission's own motion, ordering Blue Jay Wireless LLC to show cause why it should not be found in violation of federal and state requirements for designation as an eligible telecommunications carrier for purposes of offering lifeline service on a wireless basis. The order before you directs Blue Jay Wireless LLC to appear at a pre-hearing conference before an administrative law judge and to pre-file testimony and evidence.
All right, Commissioner Scripps.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the approval of the order in case number U-20744.
Commissioner Phillips.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, we'll have a roll call vote on the motion to approve the order. Commissioner Scripps.
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips.
Aye.
I also vote in favor of the motion. The motion carries by unanimous vote, and the order in case number U-20744 is approved. And back to Ms. Gold.
Item 4B1 is case number U-18091, which involves a motion for clarification filed by Geronimo Energy LLC with respect to the September 26, 2019 order issued in this docket. The Commission grants the motion, clarifies aspects of the September 26, 2019 order, and directs DTE Electric Company to file a revised standard offer tariff and standard offer power purchase agreement.
I recognize Commissioner Scripps.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the approval of the order in case number U-18091.
Commissioner Phillips.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, we'll have a roll call vote. Commissioner Scripps.
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips.
Aye.
I also vote in favor of the motion. The motion carries by unanimous vote, and the order in case number U-18091 is approved. Ms. Gold for our next item.
Items 4B2, 4C1, and 4D1 are case numbers U-20800 et al., which involve a proceeding to assign case numbers consistent with the Commission's e-docket filing system. The order before you assigns docket numbers for power supply cost recovery plans, gas cost recovery plans, steam supply cost recovery plans, power supply cost recovery reconciliations, gas cost recovery reconciliations, and steam supply cost recovery reconciliations for all rate-regulated electric, gas, and steam utilities.
All right, recognize Commissioner Scripps.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the approval of the order in case numbers U-20800 et al.
And Commissioner Phillips.
I second.
Is there any discussion? We'll have a roll call vote on the motion to approve the order. Commissioner Scripps.
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips.
Aye.
I also vote in favor of the motion. The motion carries by unanimous vote, and the order in case number U-20800 et al. is approved. We'll now turn to item 5 on the agenda, and it'll be a presentation by Melissa Seymour, who's the Executive Director of the Central Region for the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO. Ms. Seymour is going to cover MISO's electric grid operations in response to COVID, forecast of electricity capacity supplies in Michigan and the region, ongoing studies on options to increase the capacity to import additional power into Michigan. We've been working with MISO and stakeholders over the course of the year on that project. Ms. Seymour, welcome, and thank you for taking the time with us, and we look forward to your presentation and our discussion about important issues for Michigan. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me this afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you again. This is, I think, the second time or maybe third that I've done this, so I'm looking forward to discussing these topics. I'm going to try and attempt to share my screen with you so that you can see the presentation. Hopefully you'll see the presentation now on your screen. As Chair Tallberg mentioned, I'm going to provide an overview of the operational update for our COVID-19, the pandemic. I'm going to talk a little bit about the planning resource auction results because Zone 7 in particular in Michigan was impacted by some of the results of that planning resource auction. I'm going to preview the 2020 OMS MISO survey that's actually going to be discussed publicly with stakeholders this coming Friday. So you're getting a preview of that. And of course, we'll talk about the import-export transmission study. So on the operational update, I've got basically two pieces of information I would like to share. One relates to our load and energy information that we've had since we started monitoring this back on March 14th, and the other deals with outages that we have for transmission and generation. So here we show the information related to the load deviations, and since about March 14th, MISO has seen basically energy and load trending to be about 8% lower than normal, and our load shape has changed due to the COVID-19 related measures. So our daily load curve that you see down here at the bottom is flatter across the morning and evening peaks. Usually you would see a peakier system than this with a normal day pre-COVID. But however, we, as we approached last week, we saw near normal demand. So we see demand coming back. This is likely due to the warmer weather and additional usage to cool individual homes during the workday. We have noticed increased demand due to these high temperature days, which is typical of also our peers. So we've seen this also with our RTO peers in ERCOT and California. So it's not abnormal to see them sort of returning to normal. As far as generator outage and transmission outages are concerned, for transmission, MISO has seen about 109 or roughly 16% of the transmission outages move. The majority of these are for COVID. Outage activity in the footprint experienced that slowdown in April, but we saw activity gradually returning throughout the month of May and into early June. The graph here is more about generation outages. You can see this blue line, the dark blue line is 2020 as compared to 2018, 2019, and 2017 above. You can see that we had about 21 gigawatts of planned generation outage schedules across the MISO footprint that were impacted by COVID over this April and May period. Changes included ending outages earlier, delaying start times, and cancellations and rescheduling for fall of 2020. MISO has been working with our generator owners with a focus on reliably rescheduling these outages prior to our July and August, our peak summer periods, and coordinating on the scheduling of outages that you can see here for the fall of 2020, which you can see an increase in the fall as folks move their outages to the fall. So that really is just a brief high-level summary of our operations due to COVID. Before I move on to the planning resource auction, do the commissioners have any questions about our operations? Okay. So on the planning resource auction, so the planning resource auction occurred back in April of this last year, and it was for the planning year June 1st, 2020 through May 31st, 2021. Probably the biggest headline is the auction indicated that MISO region as a whole will have enough resources, capacity, and other types of resources to meet its planning reserve margin requirements for the 2020-2021 planning year. Most of the zones in MISO cleared between $4.75 and $6.88 a megawatt day. The difference in the prices from the north, central, and south region were really due to the limitation that we have south to north of transmission capability to move power. So that's what caused the differences between the two regions. As you're probably aware, Zone 7 cleared at the cost of new entry. So it basically indicated that there was insufficient zonal capacity to meet Zone 7's local clearing requirement, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. This is pretty consistent. So the results of the PRA are very consistent with what we saw in the survey of last year, the OMS MISO survey, which is a survey of loads and resources looking into the future. So we weren't surprised by the results that we saw. And this ongoing auction really reflects, we're in this industry shift from coal-fired generation and increase of reliance on gas-fired resources and non-traditional resources such as renewables and demand-side resources. We're seeing that as part of the auction. And the trends are the basis for, we have an initiative called the Resource Availability and Need Initiative that is supposed to be incentivizing the improved availability of resources in MISO. We recently made a filing about the availability of LMRs, which is also increasing our utilization of load modifying resources to meet these ongoing requirements. So I want to focus just a moment on Zone 7 and walk you through a little bit of those results. So Zone 7 again cleared at what's called the cost of new entry. They fell about 123 megawatts short of the local clearing requirement to procure resources within the border. When that happens, you do go to this cost of new entry, or CONE. And CONE is really an industry-wide term that reflects the current annual capital cost of constructing a new gas plant. So unlike our neighbor RTO like PJM, LSEs and MISOs tend to pay the auction clearing price for all capacity, that tend to pay the auction price for all capacity. In MISOs, most LSEs tend to own or acquire their capacity through bilateral arrangements. At least most or all of their contract is buy or sell. They're only buy or selling incremental amounts of capacity to fully balance their supply and required volumes in our planning resource auction. This was also the case in Zone 7. As a result, the planning resource requirement of you have a 22 gigawatt, if you can see up here, planning resource requirement, only approximately 1,150 megawatts of that will pay the cost of new entry, which is about 6% or 5% of the wholesale demand in the lower peninsula. So this again wasn't a surprise. We saw Zone 7 come very close to this last year. And so this year's, but it is true that Zone 7 did have adequate local resources when electricity providers in Michigan filed their capacity demonstration for this year's PRA under the forward-looking planning law the state adopted in 2016. But since that time period, which I think was late 2017, early 2018, the zone's local clearing requirement increased more than 5% due to changes in load, resources, and MISO rules and procedures change, which caused Zone 7 to clear at CONE this year. The reason that the short position occurred was really a drop-off or a decline in about 336 megawatts of resource this year compared to last year. That was partially offset by an increase of demand response and energy efficiency resources, but not completely offset. Zone 7 can remain reliable even though it had a shortfall. While the zone's reserve margin is only about 0.5% below its target local clearing requirement, the zone does have about 7.4% more local capacity than its forecasted peak load, even when outage rates are considered. So moreover, the zone can draw on the support that comes with being part of the MISO shared resource pool. So you'll be able to get some help from the neighbors as well. So that's just a brief overview of the planning resource auction. I know many of you already heard that information before, so it's probably not a surprise. But before I move on to the resource adequacy survey, does anybody have any questions about the planning resource auction?
Yeah, I just have a couple. We received questions about what is the impact of this in terms of the auction results. And can you just walk us through, like, if an energy provider had procured, they either own a power plant or have other resources within Zone 7,
yes.
Would they be, and they had enough to cover their minimum requirements to cover their customer base, would they be impacted by the auction results?
No, they won't. If they had gone into the auction with self-supplying or doing a fixed resource adequacy plan for 100% of covering their requirements through purchases or owning assets, then they are not exposed to any of the prices that come out of the market. It's only for those who have a deficit who were purchasing from the auction directly to meet the requirement.
Okay. And they may have forward contracts with resources outside of Zone 7 and they would still be impacted financially in this instance.
Yes, yes. So they,
okay.
Yeah, they would need to be local resources to meet the requirement here.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then I guess just any initial insights, the earlier slides you showed the decline in load projections due to COVID, you know, as we go over the course of the summer, I'm just curious with Quinsant Peak and how these projections are developed for load, if you have any insights along those lines.
Right. So one of the things that we've been trying to get from our local load serving entities is if they envision that the peak load in July or August would be lowered by the COVID. And we imagine that we might still have the same type of peak given the heat and the different conditions, but it might be at a different time of the day because we're seeing a change in the load shape. So it's hard to tell if we're going to see the decrease of the total load that we've been seeing of the 8% over the March 16th, or whether it's difficult to make that determination. Although I will tell you that we have seen load come back this week toward normal because of the heat and the conditions of folks using air conditioners and working from home.
And the restart of the economy and everything. Okay.
Yeah, the restart of the economy has also shifted the load patterns. Yep.
Any other questions on that?
Melissa, can you speak to whether this is seen as a 1-year issue or if this is going to be the new normal?
Well, I can tell you the next, you just set me up for the next presentation, which is on the OMS MISO survey. So if you could give me a minute, I will show you what your forecast is for Zone 7 in the prompt year, so 2021, and then in an out year in 2025. And we can talk about how that is how close you are to your local clearing requirement based on that information.
That's perfect. I'll save the follow-ups for that then.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And this is fresh off the presses, right? I mean,
yes, this was just posted yesterday for a meeting that's going to occur, a public meeting that will occur with all the stakeholders on Friday at 10 a.m. So this is hot off the press, and it's not the entire presentation that's been posted, but it's a subset of the slides that I thought you all would be interested in seeing. So with that, let me turn to the first slide. This is sort of the so what slide of the deck. So the main topic, the main header is that in 2021, we are sufficient as a region to meet the planning reserve margin requirement. So we're about 800 megawatts or 8.8 gigawatts longer than our requirement is. The responses that we received, so just a little bit of history on the OMS MISO survey. MISO partners with the Organization of MISO States to do a survey. We've been doing this since 2013, and really primarily we started then because we saw a lot of retirements coming with the MATS rule that came into play. We saw a lot of renewable resources coming online with states having renewable portfolio standards. So we saw a lot of changes in our baseload fleet and thought that it might be important to get a long-term coordinated view of the future. So we partnered with the Organization of MISO States back in 2013. This is actually our 8th survey. And it's really a tool. It's a snapshot in time tool of data that we gather from our load serving entities and our generator owners to show resource sufficiency for the future for the region. And we have discussions about the landscape with our stakeholders, which we will do on Friday as a result. The survey, just for your information, goes out, the emphasis is really on the first 5 years. So I'm going to show you 2021 and 2025, but the information that we gather is over 10 years from our members. The information they give us is confidential. And they provide us snapshots of their changing resource mix over time. You're going to see here that the survey solicits from their asset owners basically what they think will be there in the given year or what they think they might retire. So high certainty resources would be ones that they know will remain online. We have low certainty resources to reflect the fact that some people might be considering retiring resources going forward. So you'll see that in the survey that I'm about to show you. So basically, all of these changing resources and the uncertainty in the new resources and the range produces a range of outcomes over the next 10 years. It'll show by zone and by region how the system is doing. And that forward view really helps us prompt candid discussions with our each of our zones, regulators and load serving entities, and we have specific conversations with them about the resource needs of the future. So this survey is no different. It showed in 2021 that we were over by 800 gigawatts, but it gives you a range of 7.2 if we add in resources that were that could potentially be there, so low certainty resources and new resources. So we have a range there you're going to see in a graph. But the interesting thing is the margins are tighter for the first few years this time of the 5-year period than they were back in 2019, primarily driven by two things. One is the load raised slightly, so we went from a 0.2% growth rate in 2019 to a 0.3% growth rate, but really a lot of it was driven by the planning resource margin being increased. It went, I think, from 16.8 to 18% this year, and that was really driven by the addition of the larger generator units, which really consolidate capacity into fewer units. That increases reliability risk. An overall elevated forced outage rate for the fleet as it ages, and over double the number of peak-like demand days from the previous year. So that's driving the PRM, or the planning resource margin, to be larger. Since that 2019 surveys, we know that additional resources help maintain the regional balance, but some of our zones 2, 4, 6, and 7, do show some potential risk, some in the prompt year and some in the out year. We did use a new tool this time to use to input the data for the survey. This module e-capacity tool is the tool that we use for resource adequacy for our PRA. And so it really streamlined the process and made sure that the data was secure. So diving into the detail, first I'm going to show you the zonal map before I dive into the details. So this is just a reminder of what our zones are for our PRA, and the fact that load serving entities within each of the states or zones have to have sufficient resources to meet their load and required reserves on an annual basis. And for us, for MISO, really resource adequacy is owned by the load serving entities in the states. It is true that surpluses resources can be shared among load serving entities, so that's that shared resource pool with resource shortages, as long as you meet your local clearing requirement first. So you can import up to your capacity import limit, but you have to make sure that you maintain your local clearing requirement first. So here's the result, and this is kind of an eye chart. It's a little bit confusing, so I'm going to try to orient you to the chart. This is for the system as a whole, so this is for our whole footprint. The solid bars that you see, so the 0.8 that you see in 2021, are committed capacity projections. So those are the folks that said with high amount of certainty that we will be there in 2021. The larger dotted line of the 4.7 that you see here are resources that said that we may or may not be there, so we might retire those resources or limit their availability. And then the 1.8 that you see up here is the potential new capacity. So that's capacity that's coming through our generator interconnection queue. We give it different weights depending on how it's progressing through the queue. We are also, so it's basically 100% given a weight for gas resources and traditional resources. Wind is given about a 16.6 capacity credit, and solar is a 50% capacity credit that makes up this number. So that is the differences between the bars that you see on the chart. The line here is the 1 day in 10, 18% planning reserve margin requirement. So you can see here that in 2021, I mentioned that we were 800 megawatts long, up to 7.2 if we get new resources, or if some of these resources decide not to derate or retire. But as you go through time, you can see that we are trending more deficit than we did back in 2020, back in 2019, a little bit quicker. Even in the out years, we'll be depending on some of these new resources to make sure that they come online to complete and fill up the gap that our capacity and our retirements are filling. It's important to note that this is a snapshot in time, and what we normally see is that load serving entities do firm up their resources as they get closer to the prompt year. So while you'll see some negative numbers here, the states and the load serving entities make sure that folks are resource adequate by the time they get to the prompt year and the auction. So you know, it's not too surprising that we see deficits in the out years and sufficiency in the prompt year. So this is the slide that shows 2021, and you can see on the left-hand side, it's the duplicate of what we just saw, which was the 800 megawatts long to 7.2, depending on new resources and potential capacity not retiring. And then this is the zonal look on the right-hand side of what each zone is showing against the 1 day and 10 PRM. So let's focus on Michigan for a second. So you're seeing about a negative 1.1 for your committed capacity projections, but you could have an additional 800 megawatts if you have low certainty resources that don't retire and also resources that will be coming online. Just to let you know how this compares to last year for the same year, 2021, you've actually increased your high certainty position by almost 700 megawatts. So this would have been 700 megawatts shorter last year. So you've increased your high certainty. Some of the increase or the shortage is driven by the increase in the planning resource margin that I talked about from the 16.8 to the 18%. And that drove about a 200 megawatt more requirement. Between last year and this year, there was very little shift in low certainty or potentially unavailable resources. So you had about 1,600 megawatts of low certainty resources, which means they haven't made a decision yet. And that is embedded in these. There's also about 100 megawatts more of potential new capacity, which the total new capacity is about 280 megawatts. And so those are some of the changes that you can see that get you from last year to this year. So all in all, for 2021, you're better off than you were in this time this year than you were last year, which goes to how utilities will, as they get closer to the prompt year, will make sure that they cover their short positions. When I looked at your local clear requirement to get to Commissioner Scripps' question, you were just a little longer with your load modifying resources added in to meet your local clear requirement. Again, this is an ICAP number, so an install capability number. We use a UCAP number in the PRA, but from an ICAP perspective, when you look at your local clear requirement, you're a little long in 2021 compared to your requirement. So that's just to say, if things worked out exactly the same way that we see it today, you might not have the same situation next year that you did last year. And then this is the last slide. This is just a focus on 2025. So as you start to go out in time, you can see that more zones start to show a short position. And the system starts to show a little bit more of a short position. Again, there's these ranges because you have potential capacity projections that can be online either from resources that haven't made the decision whether they're going to retire or that are new resources. So for zone 7, you're now at a negative 1.6 position, but you have up to 1.2 that you could be available in 2025. I'll tell you that from 2025 last year to this year, the high certainty position decreased by about 640 megawatts this year. So in other words, it made you a little shorter than you were last year. The increase in your planning reserve margin added about a 235 megawatt increase. There was little shift in your available capacity or your low certainty or potentially available capacity, and you had about 850 megawatts of potential new capacity additions over last year. One of your biggest additions so you have about 2,800 megawatts of new capacity that is projected to be online this year, and the biggest one is the biggest piece of that new projection is the gas plant that DTE is building. So that's what's getting you to the position you are today. Now, if your new resources come online, so if we know the gas plant gets built and we don't have as many retirements and other facilities come online, then you would be over your 1 day in 10 margin. So you have a big range, and this will get filled in as we get closer to 2025. So that is the resource adequacy picture. I hope I answered your question, Commissioner Scripps, but do you all have any additional questions?
I'm sorry. I'm just thinking back to one of the original assumptions there on the increase in projected growth and demand, and just trying to think about that given the kind of realities at present. You know, just what are your thoughts about that projected growth and the issues that we're facing economically and otherwise at current?
Well, I think the growth rate was pretty almost negligible. The difference, it went from 0.2 to 0.3, so it's still relatively low. But to your point, if we didn't have a growth rate increase, which we may not have in 2020, again, we're looking, the hard thing is we're looking out in 2021 and beyond. So you're trying to make projections on whether or not the economy will come back and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it's just a difficult, we actually reached out to our load serving entities and they're having a difficult time making those projections as well. But you would have a little bit of a decrease in your requirement, both in your planning resource requirement and in your load under that condition. So it would be shifting the bars north of the line. So you'd be a little bit longer than you see here. So it's just harder to say until you get closer to the prompt year, but it's obviously something that we're considering around load shifts that could happen.
Thank you.
Melissa, I just have a question. So when was the survey taken in terms of the responses by the load serving entities? Do you remember when they submitted that?
Yeah, so most of it was submitted in late April, early May. Okay. Was submitted, but we used the forecast that was in the PRA. So that was submitted back in February or November, depending on the date. So these forecasts of or pre-COVID for the out years. Okay,
and then I guess a couple other questions. The target reserve margin going to 18% from the 16.8, and I think years prior it was even lower, and maybe the 15% range if I recall correctly. What's driving that? And I guess the second part of that question, do you think that with some of the reforms that you proposed to FERC for particular types of resources that might, and just the changeover of some of the older plants retiring, where the effect of that might be that going forward you may have a lower reserve margin just given the performance of the capacity resources and your systems changing?
That's exactly right. So the reason that it increased from 16.8 to 18% was 3 reasons really. One is because the new capacity that we're retiring are really smaller coal plants or smaller plants, and we're putting on more large plants. So there's a more risk of one plant going out because it's a bigger facility. So that probably won't change. But what will change is the forced outage rate is really driving that increase up. So as the older fleet gets retired and we get better forced outage rates, that'll pull down the planning reserve margin requirement. But the other one is because we're having more peak days in the year. So in other words, we used to spread it over a lot smaller number of peak demand days, and we're seeing more peak demand days happen. So it's unclear whether any reform will change that. But the forced outage rate piece of it should cause the planning reserve margin to go down as we replace older fleet with newer generation.
Thank you.
Melissa, this has been really helpful, and yes, you did answer my first question.
Good.
I guess putting on my UP hat, or Stormy Cromer, I guess, can you talk a little bit about Zone 2? Because I think that was also one of the zones that you mentioned, both in the near term and further out, was a little tight.
Yeah, so for the first time, we've seen Zone 2, and this is 2021 picture, kind of go to a negative and not really have a range above the positive line. Again, the negative is not too significant, but it's mainly retirement of existing assets or D-rates of existing assets and lower load modifying resources in the zone. This isn't something that this is something that can be made up by imports as well. So if you can see here, we have some length in the footprint. So they also are pretty have a pretty healthy local clearing requirement, similar to Michigan. But we show when we do the analysis that they are above their local clearing requirement, which means that they can import in resources from other zones to meet that requirement. So when I actually had a conversation with the load serving entities in Wisconsin who were not, and Upper Michigan, who were not as concerned about this short because they think with load modifying resources, they'll be able to meet the requirement pretty handily.
That's helpful too. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And Melissa, I think with your prior attendance at a very packed meeting in the Upper Peninsula amidst a major snowstorm, you deserve a Stormy Cromer. You're like entitled to that.
Well,
we appreciate.
I'll tell you, like I said, this was the first time we had this conversation with them being short, but I'm really hopeful that we see them getting a little bit longer in 2025. So I think the load serving entities, and in particular the one in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, believes that they can handle this this position for the auction.
I just want to touch on one thing, just so we're really clear, anyone listening. So as long as resources are available across the footprint, which is like the green bars on the top, and as long as our zones for Michigan are projected to meet their local clearing requirement, that those two factors show, again, based on these projections from the survey, that we would be meeting our reliability requirements. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is correct. Okay. And in the last PRA, let's be clear that you met your requirement for the system. So you didn't, so the planning resource margin for the system was met by imports for Michigan. Yeah. It's just your local requirement that you fell short of. That's right.
All right. Well, are there any other questions? Oh, you've got your import study. Sorry.
Is that okay? I've got one more little section.
Yes, I want to hear this.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, you guys are aware of the import study, so we're changing gears again. So this was a request from the Commission to conduct this import-export study. It's an information-only study at this time to look into expansion of transmission or other resources to increase your capacity import limit and your export limit. So just to orient you, capacity import limits are the maximum amount of generation that can reliably be reported into Michigan or the MISO system. Our study objectives are here to determine a range of electric system expansion options. So to increase the capacity import limit by 3 amounts, approximately 500 megawatts, 1,500, and at least 3,000. For reference, your capacity import limit today for the last auction was around 3,200. For each system expansion option, MISO will specify the scope, which is like the voltage, the equipment, the miles of transmission, all of that information, and the estimated capital cost. So at the conclusion of our study, we will have deliverables will really be a report that we're going to put together for the Commission, as well as a summary presentation. You can expect to see a list of expansion options with all that information, with cost and the associated increase in capacity import and export if that is capable too. In addition, as the scenarios can be used to provide an indication of future local reliability requirements. So we'll provide the local reliability requirements for scenario 2 and scenario 3. So you can see how close you'll be to meeting your LCR under those scenarios. And again, MISO won't be making any project recommendations to MTEP, which is our transmission expansion plan in 2020, based on the outcome of the study. But there is always an opportunity to include some of these in the next year's transmission expansion plan. So I just wanted real quickly to show you some of the results that we already received. So one of the scenarios that we did was a 5-year out analysis, and this was presented in Michigan in late May. So it has been completed. MISO performed really 2 types of voltage analysis that I'll talk about in a moment, and a thermal analysis for the study. So again, the goal of this study was to see what is necessary to add 500 megawatts or add 1,500 megawatts to the current 3,200 megawatt cell. No adjustments were needed in any of the 3 analyses to achieve the 500 megawatts, but there were adjustments needed for the 1,500 megawatts in 2 of the cases. So let me just talk a little bit about the voltage analysis. I've got 2 of them up here, load to load and gen to gen. There are 2 different kinds of analysis. The gen to gen analysis really talks about evaluating changes as generators within the zone are moved and other generators outside the zone are moved to compensate to make up the voltage. And the load to load is just a load version of that, which evaluates changes of load within and outside the zone or moved. Both can be helpful to really understand the impacts. A gen to gen study tends to be less conservative, especially when considering voltage constraints. Since local generation directly provides voltage, a voltage constraint can be mitigated by simply increasing the generation within the zone. However, during system peak conditions, that's not always possible. So MISO actually uses the load to load voltage analysis to determine the SIL and cell for the PRA that we have. The load to load analysis that we did here identified 4 projects that would have been needed to give the 4,715 megawatt result. And the limiting element you can see here was the diesel 120 kV element. The thermal analysis, it took, could be increased to 5,100 megawatts before seeing the limit element of Monroe to Brownstone 345. And there was no constraints identified for the gen to gen voltage analysis. So that was what we presented to the stakeholders in Michigan in late May. The next step is we have another meeting in July where we're going to come with the out year analysis, so the 10-year analysis, and also start talking about solution sets for how to mitigate some of these constraints so we can increase the transfer capability. So I just wanted to give you that really quick before concluding today. So if you have any questions on this analysis.
I guess just one clarifying question. So this analysis, our current limit's like 3,200 based on how you do the LOLE studies. Yep. And then with this, you're sort of increasing what you could get to from an import limit, and then figuring out what part of the system is like the choke point, but it's not saying like what you have to do to fix that. That's the next phase, as well as like the longer term. Okay.
That's right. So the next phase will be, what do we have to do to mitigate?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. You're on mute.
Apologies. I accidentally muted you instead of switching to you. Oh. I'm so sorry for that.
Oops, she's still talking.
Melissa, you are currently muted. Like on Teams.
Okay, sorry. I had to get back to my Teams. I had to get back to my Teams before I could do it because all I could see was my presentation. So you were right. The solution sets are going to be given to us by folks in the stakeholder process. And so that's what we'll be soliciting during the next meeting in July.
And this could be transmission options. It could include energy storage, generation.
Right. It could be anything. So it's any kind of option that they want to solicit, that they want to provide, that we'll look at. Okay.
And did I hear you right that the timing in terms of developing those solutions and putting price tags is not the MTEP 2020 process, but potentially MTEP 2021 towards the end of next year?
Yeah, so basically, if anything comes out of the process that looks to be promising, one of the transmission providers or we can bring it forward as part of the next MTEP process as an official project in the process that we'll evaluate. That's correct.
Excellent.
Well, that was my last slide, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and present to you today.
Well, thank you so much. It was a great presentation. I really appreciate all that you've done to support us in Michigan. It goes back years, and with the surveys and working on legislation here in Michigan with the 2016 energy laws. And I know that you and your team have just been, trusted by many as we navigate a really dynamic time during with the energy industry. So thank you. And again, this is really helpful to join our meeting today.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we do have, I'm going to turn now to item number 6 on the agenda, and we've got time reserved for members of the public to address the commission. Again, if you'd like to make comment and have access to the team live stream Q&A feature on your computer, please enter your name and your comment, which will then be read aloud by our staff to the commissioners. And this feature is on the right-hand side of the control bar next to the mute button. Just as a reminder, the Q&A feature is intended for public comment directed to the commission and not to engage with other participants or respond to their comments. And after we take comments through this feature, we'll open up the phone line for those of you that have called into the meeting and would like to address the commission verbally. And if you want to be queued up for verbal comments on the phone, you can also, and you're using the live stream as well, you can put your name in there and just indicate you wish to make a verbal comment, and we'll take those first. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Cole. And when we do get to the verbal comments, right now the phone lines are still muted, but when we do get to them, you'll need to hit *6 for that. And just, if you could keep your comments to around 3 minutes, that would be helpful. I'll see if Ms. Cole's available, if there's any comments on the live stream.
There are no comments submitted through the live event Q&A at this time. We'll continue to monitor that over the next few minutes.
Okay. All right. So if there's any comments over the phone, please hit *6 and include your name, where you're from, and then your comments to the commission. I'm just checking before we do that, Madam Secretary. Is there something you're shaking your head? Was there anything you need to say? No. Okay. I will take that as a no. All right. So *6 to unmute your phone line. Any comments?
There are still no comments coming in through the chat.
All right. All right. Does not look like we have anyone making comment today. Well, thank you. We'll just move to a couple announcements before we wrap up today's meeting. I think Commissioner Phillips wanted to mention an exciting announcement that took place this week.
Yes, I do have a couple of brief comments. One, just really hoping that everyone stays safe today. I know that we have some storms bearing down on Lansing at this moment, so please keep aware of the weather situation this afternoon. Secondly, to the chair's comment, yesterday the Michigan Public Service Commission, in partnership with Connected Nation Michigan and with the support of the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, DTMB, and the Michigan Department of Education, released a map of over 300 publicly accessible Wi-Fi hotspots throughout the state of Michigan. What is particularly valuable about these locations is that as we continue to work and learn remotely, engage in social distancing, and prepare for the potential of a second wave of COVID-19, many of these digital parking lots will allow for residents without broadband access at home to stay connected without compromising their health and safety by increasing their exposure to the virus. This is not an end-all solution, and there is still much more work to be done in order to increase accessibility, affordability, and the adoption of broadband in Michigan. But coupled with the tens of millions of dollars in state and federal grants in Michigan to support the expansion of broadband infrastructure in unserved communities, increase telehealth services, and provide the resources necessary for students in Michigan to stay connected, this initiative is an important bridge to continued investment in broadband infrastructure and programs throughout the state. So just very excited to have that launch today. And I do just have one additional comment. The commission here has been very aware and invested in the renewed discussion and movement and conversations around race, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the aftermath of the really horrific events in Minneapolis. Certainly for me, it is still taking some time to digest what this renewed movement, what the results will be, what our actions should be. But what I just wanted to state in this commission meeting here today is that the commission will not be silent and not be inactive during this important time. We certainly are looking for ways in order to engage our staff and engage our stakeholders in this dialogue. So just asking for folks to stay tuned, and we certainly are continuing to digest this internally and figure out what the best and most genuine path is going forward to engage in this renewed interest in having this important dialogue around race relations in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Phillips. Commissioner Scripps, did you have any updates on the UP task force or other developments?
We've had our second meeting of phase 2, which looks at the broader issues in the Upper Peninsula around reliability and affordability beyond simply the sort of alternatives to current propane delivery. That was held yesterday. Our next meeting is next month. There's a possibility that it will actually be in person at the far western end in Gogebic County. And have so far really focused on sort of the building blocks. Kathy Cole from our staff has done a tremendous job. And yesterday we also had ATC talking about the transmission infrastructure in the Upper Peninsula. Those presentations and everything from phase 1 as well is available on the website for the task force. That's michigan.gov/UP Energy Task Force. And you should be able to find all the resources. And again, there's an opportunity for public comment at each of the meetings of the task force, and the robust public comment that we've received really at every meeting has, I think, done a great deal to inform the deliberations.
All right, I just have a couple updates. One, I appreciate Commissioner Phillips' remarks about the issues going on in our country dealing with race relations, and just want to acknowledge, you know, how hard it can be, how personally this affects individuals at our commission, and you know, at a time that we remain focused on utility regulation, it's hard not to be affected, but also think about what we should be doing at the commission. So as he mentioned, stay tuned for more on that. I also just want to give a little update on operations. I've just been incredibly inspired by how productive the Commission's team has been over the last few months. We held 2 fully remote hearings for major rate cases held in May and June. I'm not sure there's a commission in the country that has done that. And not only were those conducted, but there was a lot of preparation that went into it to troubleshoot issues and get people comfortable with the technology, and being able to ensure that there's still the appropriate due diligence and due process that is so important in those and other cases. So just appreciate the work on that. We've held meetings, workshops, issued reports, filed testimony by staff, expert testimony, responding to customer calls, improving energy assistance program delivery, just to name a few. Also, there's been a lot of activity monitoring critical infrastructure and customer impacts related to COVID, as well as the recent dam failure up in the Midland area. And even today, as Commissioner Phillips mentioned, the thunderstorms affecting power supply. So I appreciate our team's diligence on that. Also, like many organizations around the state, we're working to plan our return to in-person work. I avoid saying return to work because we've been working incredibly hard over the last few months but to, the in-person work in the office, what that looks like. We have a team internally that's focused on that, trying to take lessons from other organizations, whether it's outside the country or here in the U.S., and also in coordination with Lara. So more on that as we move forward. I'll just say that we do plan to continue to telework to the extent possible for the foreseeable future. Although, some activities such as commission meetings may resume in-person options as required by law, and we'll look to continue to provide the remote capability as well. And we'll communicate with stakeholders and public through the website, listservs, press releases, and social media. So if you're not following us already, encourage you to do that. And then I do have a personal announcement to make. Earlier this week on Monday, June 8th, I had announced to the staff that the Electric Reliability Council of Texas voted, the nominating committee of the board voted on Monday to include me on the slate of unaffiliated directors. This would be a board director spot. The next step, it's really step one in a 3-step process. The next step would be to go out for a membership vote. So that's where we are now. And then subsequently, based on the outcome of that vote, it would go before the Public Utility Commission of Texas for a formal review and approval process. So that's probably like in the October timeframe. This board seat would begin in January of 2021, and I would intend to step down from the commission prior to joining the ERCOT board, should that process be successful. So I just wanted those listening to be aware of that too, in terms of my time on the commission. But this is not goodbye, so I'll leave that for another day. All right, so that concludes today's meeting. Our next commission meeting is scheduled for July 9th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. I also just want to note for those listening that we are planning to hold a special commission meeting on Tuesday, June 30th, 2020. And there'll be an announcement this week, including an agenda with the items we plan to take up on June 30th. And is there a motion to adjourn, Commissioner Scripps?
Madam Chair, I move to adjourn today's meeting.
Commissioner Phillips?
I second the motion.
Well, we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Scripps?
Aye.
Commissioner Phillips?
Aye.
I also vote in favor of the motion. The motion carries by unanimous vote and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.